Hello there, true believers, and welcome to another episode of Tier Talk, the series where I go over media franchises old and new to rate them based on my own experiences and preferences before your very eyes. As always, if you find this video entertaining, let me know with a big ol' thumbs up, and consider hitting subscribe for more geeky content from the Northeast's biggest nerdy stuff lover. Without further ado, let's jump right into this list with today's topic of conversation: platforming video game mascots. I'll be honest guys, this one's gonna get me all sorts of nostalgic. Platforming games have been a part of my life since my early childhood, with games like Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, and Sonic the Hedgehog having been there since the very beginning. Some of these, not so much, but it's kinda hard to have not played at least one game with them in it, so it's fair to say that these guys represent most of, if not every era of video games. Someone, somewhere, has mastered every single jump, dash, and collection mechanic in these games. I'll just be dipping my toes into each of these little fandoms to get some conversation going on all of them. Just remember, this entire list and the things I'll be talking about in this video are my opinion, so if there's a part of this video where you agree or disagree more, try not to roast me too hard in the comments. Or do. I don't really give a darn. Discussion is discussion. And with that, let's just get right into it, starting with the first entry on this list, the eponymous legend of Sony, the Ape Escape PIPO monkey. Alright, so from the beginning here, I'm just going to try and, when I rate these guys, I'm gonna try to judge them more for their own merits, like what they look like and how they function as characters. I'm not trying to judge like the overall game that these guys are from, the games, plural, but it may come up sometimes. I just know that I'm going to try to like talk more about like the recognizability of the characters instead of like the game that these guys are coming from. So let's talk about Ape Escape and the PIPO monkey. So the PIPO monkey, for those of you who don't know, Ape Escape platforming game that forced the DualShock to be mandatory. I think the first game is known specifically for that fact. Like, it's one of the first video games that was like, hey, you have to have analog sticks in order to play this game. If you boot this game, the first thing that comes up is a menu telling you that, and then you literally get dropped into the first like level, and then you can't play if you don't have analog sticks. Like, you literally just stand there. You cannot move. But the PIPO monkey in itself, I think, was Sony's first real attempt to try and make a mascot for themselves. I know up until like the first Ape Escape game was kind of released a little late in the PS1's lifespan. They already had characters like Crash and Spyro, Rayman, had one or two games already. Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy VII had already come out, but the PIPO monkey is kind of special because it was created by Japan Studio, one of the in-house teams at Sony that made video games, and this kind of became a phenomenon in Japan, not so much in America. Like the big eye design and the wide open mouths, this just hit it off with Japan really easily, and so I think a lot of iconography that had to deal with PlayStation usually had a PIPO monkey involved at some point. Nowadays they kind of tend to lean on like the X square circle triangle thing when they want to say, hey, PlayStation buttons. But for a while there in the beginning, it was usually this PIPO monkey's face, and that kind of wore off after a while. I think the PS3 era is when like the last Ape Escape games came out. There was a motion controlled game that came out in like 09 or 10 that didn't really do so hot, and then they shut down Japan Studio a couple of years ago. So in terms of the PIPO monkey, he's cute. He's cute and it's simple, right? Like, he's got his big face with those really ginormous dead eyes that stare at you, the helmet that changes colors depending on if he's pissed off or not. It's a really iconic design, and I think it's pretty solid in terms of like a mascot. If you want a character to represent you, it probably needs to be something cute like this, right? I'm going to go ahead and give this a solid B tier, only because compared to some of the others on this list, the monkey doesn't really have the last ability. If the monkey was as popular and as great as I maybe exaggerate to say, then he should have the staying power of somebody at least like maybe Crash. Nobody can stand up to Mario, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. But you would think that if a franchise wanted to push a character as their mascot, they would still be making games for it, but this stopped 2 generations ago. Next, let's talk about Banjo-Kazooie, and oh my god, can you say fumble. Banjo-Kazooie, when the games came out on the N64, was really solid. Usually when you bought an N64, it was either to play Super Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie, but these guys were like the dynamic duo. If you had an N64, Banjo-Kazooie were at the top of your list. I think Rare did a really good job by introducing these 2 characters by giving them like, I don't want to say polar opposite personalities, but whereas like Banjo was kind of lighthearted, happy-go-lucky, the other side of his coin is Kazooie, which is like a loudmouth brat, asshole bird, which I think is a really smart, really fun design trope. So these 2 coming out on the N64 was solid. Unfortunately, they didn't have nearly enough staying power. These guys got their 2 games on the N64 and then a couple of handheld titles for the different Game Boys. I think the Game Boy Advance has like 2 of them. And then they had Nuts and Bolts, which just fundamentally changed everything about not only their appearance but also their game design, and it flopped pretty hard. I think the game has gotten better with retrospect, but I don't think people nearly give that game as much credit when compared to their first 2 games. So I know that there's a semi-decent movement to bring them back because their game design was so simple and the humor in their games was so great, but whereas compared to some of the others on this list, they had enough power to be icons on their consoles, but like that's as far as it went. I'm gonna give these guys a C only because of the I like them, but they had potential that totally just got swept under the rug. Speaking of sweeping, let's talk about BLINX, the time sweeper. Do you guys remember BLINX? I remember BLINX. I think this is another one of those underrated gems where I'm probably just gonna stick it immediately in the C tier right with Banjo, because it's the same exact scenario. You had a cute little cat animal mascot with a unique weapon. You had the goggles, which were like every character had to have some trait about them that made them iconic, right? Like the People Monkey had the helmet, Banjo-Kazooie, like Kazooie lived in his backpack, Crash had his jeans and that stupid ass tongue, Mario has his mustache and his really cool overalls and his hat. BLINX had his goggles and this really whack ass. I think it's a vacuum. I don't remember exactly. I played the first BLINX game for a weekend when I was like 12 at one of my friend's house that had an Xbox. I was a PlayStation kid growing up, so my one friend had an Xbox and we would play BLINX sometimes in his basement when I was growing up. But as far as I know, as far as I remember, I'm not a huge BLINX guy, but he had 2 games on the original Xbox, and then I think he might have a remaster on the 360, and then that's it. This dude was a launch title for the Xbox, I believe, and like that's as far as it went for BLINX's legacy, which sucks, but the Xbox wasn't notorious for platforming child-friendly media. The Xbox was kind of dropped to get a lot of people to play couch co-op games, and they had a real big emphasis on this is a adult demographic console, so platformers didn't typically do well on the Xbox. I feel like if BLINX as a character had its time to shine on more than just Xbox, it probably would have done better, because this character is cute, he's very obviously a little spunky, and he should have gotten better than what he got. BUBSY. Fucking BUBSY I'm throwing immediately in the D tier. And the reason I'm doing that is because this is another character that just fell off. All of the 2D games of BUBSY are super duper fun. They're innovative and they're creative. A lot of the 2D games are pretty fun to play with BUBSY. BUBSY 3D is a mess. I played the first BUBSY 3D, well actually the first 3D BUBSY game, and that was a nightmare. BUBSY himself is also just super standard. There isn't a lot about him to show off, to get people to pay attention to him. He's an orange cat with a big toothy smile and he has a white shirt on, and that's it. He's not like Conker or something where he has some really weird attitude thing, and he's not like Sonic where he's like politely spunky or something like that, and he's not like Crash where he's just wacky for no reason. Bubsy just kind of exists in a weird space, and his games after the what was the one that came out on the Jaguar? I can't remember what it's called, but it was like the second or third Bubsy game, just weren't fun. I think when you got to Bubsy 3D and they didn't nail the 3D right away, it kind of just, for me, it wrote off what he was capable of, and I think that's just a sad thing. That's just a really sad thing. So I'm gonna put Bubsy in the D tier. If he had literally anything else about him to make him stand out from all of the other orange mascots in this lineup here, it'd probably be a little bit more iconic. And it's your boy Crash Bandicoot. Oh my god, I love Crash. Oh my god, I love Crash. This is gonna be me totally biased, but I'm gonna try to push through. Crash has some major staying power. I think with every console generation that has come and gone, there has been at least one Crash game. So we've had the 3 on the PS1, well 4, 5 technically if you want to count CTR and Crash Bash, but then you got a handful of spin-offs for the Game Boys. There was a new, I think it's a duology. You had a handful of racing games on the PS2, had a couple new platformers. During the PS3 era, actually, I don't think there was any new Crash games. I think all that they did was they skipped to the PS3, and then the PS4 comes around, and then they start doing the HD re-releases. And then they released It's About Time right at the end of the PS4's lifespan. For the most part, Crash Bandicoot is probably just as iconic as a PIPO monkey. These are kind of the two sides of the same coin. PIPO monkey was really popular in Japan. Crash was really popular basically everywhere else. And when you think about the effort that Naughty Dog put in to make those games really good, Crash just has a lot of staying power that a bunch of these mascots just don't have. Crash's design is also super simple, but it's unique in that he's a bandicoot. Like, you kind of have to remind yourself what he is when compared to like BLINX or BUBSY, which are just like colored cats, you know? Saying that Crash Bandicoot, he's a bandicoot, that's interesting. That's special. You could basically go between one of two extremes for Crash. He's either really happy but like can't speak, or you could just make him batshit insane and people will be like, yeah, that's Crash. Yeah, it doesn't matter, you just pick one. And I think that's something special, is that Crash affected a lot of people when he came out. I'm going to put him in the A tier, and that's probably just because I'm a little bit more biased, but compared to these two right here directly, Crash has more games, and also he's just had a lot more staying power when compared to the PIPO monkey. Speaking of the staying power, let's talk about Donkey Kong. So Donkey Kong has been around like fucking forever. I think it was either 82 or 83 when the first Donkey Kong game came out, where he was throwing barrels down the scaffolding at Mario. He wasn't known as Mario then, I don't think, but since that point, Donkey Kong has kind of been like a C tier, B tier Nintendo mascot, and generally with like every generation jump, he gets his own game. He's featured all the time in like the Mario verse. He's just a constant character that doesn't get the back burner, but he also doesn't get as much of the limelight as he probably deserves. I like Donkey Kong's design. I kept, when I was making this list and getting the pictures there, I kept trying to figure out why he's called Donkey Kong. Like, I get the Kong part because he's like he's a gorilla, right? Like, that's the obvious part. The donkey part kind of put me off, and I still don't know why. I should have Googled it before I made this video, but the name is really fun to say. Donkey Kong, DK. A ton of the platforming games that he has in like the the 5th and 6th generation consoles are really fun to play. Everything from the SNES all the way up to the GameCube are just really fun Donkey Kong games. Tropical Freeze was a blast, but I am kind of sad that he hasn't gotten anything recently. He just had his cameo in the Mario movie, which I think was fun. Maybe that can lead to something else. Maybe we got a Donkey Kong game on the way. I would like to play that. I would like to play a new game with Donkey Kong, perhaps an updated character model would be awesome, because he's basically had this same look since like 1990. I'm gonna put him in the B tier just because he's here and he exists, and he's definitely not on the same level as, say, like Mario or Sonic or whatever, but he's also always like lurking in their games, which I think has something to say about like him as a character. Now we're gonna talk about Gex, and Gex is one of the earliest examples I can think of a traditional 2D platformer. When you think about the games that came to console and computers specifically, Gex was good for computer gamers everywhere. He's probably one of the first that comes to mind when I think a platforming game mascot that you saw in homes everywhere. Gex is a douchebag. I don't like him as a character. He's just kind of an ass, and he doesn't, again, he's just a gecko. He's just a green and yellow lizard that doesn't really have any defining traits about him aside from, you know, his personality, which, you know, if you just throw like a lizard, like, I think the glasses are the part that does it. If you took away the glasses and all the stuff that goes on behind him and you just put this stupid gecko on a piece of paper, most people wouldn't be able to tell you who he is. They just say it's a lizard, which is kind of sad. But if you show this image to anybody who's over the age of like 25, you'll know that's Gex. You'll know this is the guy that got sucked into the TV land. You'll know that this is the guy who throws an attitude that he has to get off his couch and go do stuff. This is a D tier. Again, he's like borderline F because there's just not much else about him other than that he's a douchebag. He likes to watch TV. Jak and Daxter is super solid, like super solid. The very first game, the first time that you see these guys, there is just something that makes you gravitate towards this weird like mythical atmosphere, that the precursor legacy, right? That sounds so cool. Jak and Daxter were like the cool guys platforming. Like the first game had a mature-ish tone, but it lent a lot towards the fantasy department. So there was this duality that suddenly occurred when the second and third games came out, and that kind of had that reflected in specifically the design of Jak. In the first game, he's like super young and he's kind of quirky and whatever. He has one eye that's bigger than the other eye, that sort of stuff. And then as the games proceeded and he goes through his life and his experiences, Jak just gets more hardened. He always just looks really pissed off, but he's also like really cool. Like you see him and you're like, fuck yeah, that's Jak. So yeah, I don't know, he's pretty great. And then Daxter's also suffers from orange mascot syndrome. So, and I think the developers knew that, which is why they had to give him like a really sassy, really fierce and snappy personality that kind of just brought out the side of Jak that he lost after the first game. So when you see these two in tandem, they make a whole complete picture, and they're easily recognizable because you have to say to yourself, Jak and Daxter. If it was just one of the other, it might not have been such a big deal, but you see these two on the screen, you know they're both important, that they're both main characters. They're not side characters, both of them are. I think that says a lot about them as protagonists, that you have to consider them both at the same time. Again, I'm probably gonna throw these guys in the B tier just because after the completion of Jak 3, and then immediately after that, they didn't really have anything else going on. After Jak 3, they had Jak X, which was a racing spin-off game, and then they had The Lost Frontier, which released on the PS2 and then later the PSP, I think. And that game was seen much less favorably, so they didn't really get a chance to shine after that. But I know that a lot of people are hearkening for them to come back because, again, they were very iconic for their time. It's just that Sony has kind of moved on into different IPs and with what they want to support nowadays. KO the Kangaroo. This guy's games are under fucking rated. I think not enough people have played KO games, and I think if you enjoyed a majority of these other ones, you would definitely enjoy a KO game. The first game just recently it's basically a remake. I can't tell if it's a reboot or a remake because I didn't play the OG. I only looked up after having found out this game was on sale and was like, what the heck is KO about? And I haven't finished it yet. It's like one of the 5 or 6 that I'm working on right now. And and I'm having a lot of fun with it. It's definitely one of the more lighthearted games that I have decided to play recently, and I enjoy it for that. It definitely doesn't take itself too seriously, which I can appreciate. KO also has a very simplistic but effective design. He's just a kangaroo. He's an well, you can't even say anthropomorphic because kangaroos stand on 2 feet anyway, but he's a kangaroo that wears jeans or cargo shorts, and he has 2 gigantic mystic gloves, and that's really cool. That's iconic. Like, you can see how much or how easy it is to market just because he has 2 gigantic gloves. This is a decent mascot. He's just not really that popular because there's already a marsupial that kind of fits in with that KO is basically a combination of 2 different mascots. Like, if you threw Sonic and Crash in a blender, this guy would pop out. For that reason, I'll put him in the C tier. He's probably underrated as shit, and his games are pretty fun. He just doesn't have a lot of public staying power, and for that reason, I'll throw him in C. And then there's Kirby. Kirby is funny to talk about. This guy is basically like a fluffy pink ball of destruction, and I don't think enough people have an appreciation for Kirby. Super iconic, super easy to recognize, and like, you know immediately what he's about. If you've seen him on the screen for like 10 seconds, you could tell me what his powers are, and you could tell me how likable and cute he is. Again, this is another situation where Kirby did a lot in Japan, not so much in America, and that's probably just because of Japan's appreciation for cartoony characters, but he's also basically just a reminiscent of, he's a pink Pac-Man, and Pac-Man was nuts in the 80s. So having a character that did what Pac-Man did but turn it into a superpower was huge. That being said, I'm going to let my personal bias show a little bit here, and I don't really have an appreciation for Kirby games. Like, I respected the shit out of him, and I know that people really like his games, but for me it's difficult. There's like 2 Kirby games that I can say that I liked playing, and it's probably because every time they come out with a Kirby game, it's something different. There's no consistency in his titles. Like, Forgotten Land is nothing like Epic Yarn, and Epic Yarn isn't anything like Kirby Superstar. There is just so much variance in his gameplay. The only thing that's consistent is like character personalities and what they do. Kirby eats stuff, Meta Knight has a ship, and King Dedede hits stuff with a hammer. So for me, Kirby in of itself is really cute, but sitting back and like being like, oh, like a Kirby game. Do I want to play a Kirby game, or do I want to play like a Sonic game? Do I want to play a Rayman game? I almost never come back to Kirby. So if Kirby was in a better franchise, or they had like a better glue for what they want him to be, I think that would be awesome. It should also be noted that of all of the characters on this list, only Donkey Kong and Kirby have had daytime television shows. Ape Escape had like a stint on Nickelodeon, I guess, with this god-awful looking Ape Escape 2 thing, but that's it. Crash doesn't have anything, Gex, Bubsy, none of these guys have anything, only Donkey Kong and Kirby do. So if we're gonna put them in a list here, I think Kirby deserves to stand next to Donkey Kong in terms of like recognizability. He's cute as shit, it's just his games are the one part that's a little bit weird for me. We're gonna talk about KNACK next, and I think KNACK might actually go, oh no, I'll put him right in the D tier. KNACK is like weird to talk about because everybody knows what KNACK is, but I don't think enough people have actually played KNACK. In terms of his design, he's really super badass. Like, I really like the fact that his first form is just this really super cute Lego monster thing that you could probably stick in any video game and be like, yeah, okay, I like that, I understand his premise. But then like when he consumes stuff in the environment and he gets to be this super huge Goliath, this really awesome monstrosity thing, this is really cool. It's basically just like what if Hulk was made out of Lego pieces. The problem is he doesn't have a good game, or games I should say. He has 2, and he's a PlayStation exclusive, so a lot of people didn't really get to invest in what KNACK had to offer. And it's also just like, compared with some of the other faces on this, he goes the wrong way. Like, if I should put the cute KNACK on this picture, you could probably see what I'm going for here, but this form of KNACK I think is the part that people like, but it's also the one that you see the least. So that sucks, but that's what you get when when you have a character that has two different faces and you put them in the same game and call them the same character. Mario. What the fuck can I say about Mario that people haven't said already? A lot of gamers' first experiences were with Mario. The first Nintendo console had a Mario, so like, of course, that's the game that they pushed to say, hey, come buy our console, you'll get a copy of Mario. And Mario is probably one of, if not the most recognizable video game mascot of all time. You see this guy, you see his mustache, you see his hat, you know who he is, you know where he came from, you know how old he is. He's really flashy, he's got a nice color palette with the red and the blue. His powers change his outfit, which I think is something really cool. He's also just a really nice person. Like, it doesn't matter what world Mario is in, he's just a stand-up dude. I think there's this weird trend in pop culture media, like with his movie and also the cartoon that ran in like the 80s or whatever, that kind of gave him a bit of an attitude, which I think was a funny spin on his character. But I also think that if when you see Mario, you smile, you're happy, you know what you're getting invested in. It also really helps that the games that he's from aren't like difficult. They're pretty easy games, so anybody can sit down and play them, which is really special. I think Mario is probably like the only appropriate S tier for this list, because everybody in the world knows who the fuck Mario is. Everybody has fun playing the games, except for maybe like the Wii era, the new Super Mario Bros or whatever the heck they're called. The weird ones where you had to turn the Wiimote sideways. Those were just weird games to play. But aside from that, I think generally people like Mario games, and his character design is just super clean and effective. Mega Man, I'm gonna stick Mega Man immediately in the A tier. Now, I haven't played very many Mega Man games, and I've even completed less than those. I think I've only ever finished maybe 3 out of like the 8 Mega Man games that I've played. But I'll tell you why I throw him in the A tier. Mega Man is another character that's just like Crash in that he has a very memorable design, and he is iconic for the video game industry. He doesn't have a lot of media staying power, like if you show him outside, like if there was a movie about Mega Man, or if there was a cartoon about Mega Man or something like that, then there'd be something a little different. There are animated features with Mega Man in them, which are cool in their own right, but Mega Man is special to the video game community. The first like 8 Mega Man games in his solo series, just Mega Man, not Mega Man X, did a lot in terms of video game rules and comprehension. When you talk about video game design, Mega Man often comes up in that category because the developers that made the Mega Man games were some of the best pioneers in like logic and stuff. He also just has a super clean, super interesting design. He's got his blue ass helmet and his buster on one arm and his hand in the other one. His childlike face made it so that way kids everywhere could imprint themselves onto this character and to the cool stuff that he did. It's also just really interesting to think that like this guy is a robot. That's not a person under there. That's a robot. I think that's pretty fun. And I think a lot of people thought it was fun too, otherwise Mega Man wouldn't have been one of the best selling franchises in the entirety of the Nintendo Entertainment System's lifespan. Mega Man deserves a lot of respect. He's super fucking cool and his games are awesome. That's really like, I get as much enjoyment out of playing Mega Man 5 through 8 that I do playing Crash Bandicoot 1, 2, and 3. And I think that's something really special, and for me that might be a little bit biased, but I don't care. Cards on the table, I would play a Mega Man game over like a Donkey Kong game or Banjo or BLINX or whatever the heck on this list. Next, we're gonna talk about Ratchet and Clank. And if you ask me, I think that Ratchet and Clank are as close to platform defining as you could possibly get. There are so many, and I mean so many, Ratchet and Clank games that came out between the PS2 and PS4 era. There's like 4 different PS2 Ratchet and Clank games. Clank has his own spin-off series. There's like 2 trilogies worth on the PS3 era, and like there's a handful on the PS4. There's a lot of Ratchet and Clank games, and I think that's worth taking into consideration here. When looking at the other games on this list, you have to think about like, how many Crash games games are there? How many Banjo games? And so like knowing they have that kind of staying power specifically for Sony related products is astounding. That being said, I wouldn't consider them like the mascots of Sony, but they definitely have that recognizability. They have a movie. Ratchet and Clank have a movie about them. Like before the Super Mario Bros. Movie, the more recent animated one, not the live action one, Crash, Mega Man, as far as I know, Mega Man doesn't have any movies, but I have to look into that, second guess that. Kirby has a TV show, Donkey Kong has a TV show. Before any of these other guys got a movie, Sonic got a movie after Ratchet and Clank got a movie. That's so fucking cool. Ratchet and Clank is awesome. I wish I had played more of his games growing up. I'll throw him in the B tier, just because he is like they are just barely shy of breaking through into becoming like massive iconic status. Like if the Rift Apart was awesome, I loved Rift Apart when it came out. Ratchet being like the sole survivor of the Lombax species in his universe, and then Clank being a one-of-a-kind misprint robot, and the two just becoming iconic heroes in their universe is really awesome. That's really cool about them. I appreciate that a lot. They just very short of becoming Crash and Mega Man status. All right, let's talk about Rayman next, because Rayman is pretty freaking cool, right? Rayman is an example of another mascot character that really had love and passion built into his games from the beginning, but then very quickly fell off. People stopped talking about Rayman, they stopped putting Rayman in video games and stuff, to the point where he started a venture with another mascot character, the Rabbids, and then they kind of just booted him out of his own franchise. Like the Rabbids were introduced in a Rayman game, and then the next game had very little Rayman in it, and then they had Rabbids exclusive games for like 3 or 4 in a row. And it wasn't until recently, in the most recent Rabbids game with Mario in it, that Rayman was able to finally make a cameo. There hasn't been enough Rayman love recently at all in the video game landscape. He had his games on the PS3 era, and then into the Wii U era, the Legends and Origins games, but there hasn't really been a lot of love for him after that, which kind of sucks, because even games like Ratchet and Clank and Crash Bandicoot, Spyro have gotten resurgence, but Rayman was one of the very first PS1 games, so it sucks to see that he has even less staying power than we thought he did. Otherwise, he's like really solid. He's got the hairdo, he doesn't have any arms or legs, he's pretty easily recognizable. It's just his games kind of fell off after the third one for the PS2. I'd say Origins does a pretty good job in maintaining quality, but it's just not the same. Like, you compare Origins and Legends to the first 3 games in his franchise, and there's really a big difference there, and that kind of sucks. I liked the maturity, and I liked the, I don't want to say complicated humor, but it was just a lot more fun than weird squeaky noises and really shiny sprites making really crazy animation and stuff like that. That's not to denounce that the quality of Origins and Legends 2, I had fun with those games, it's just that they feel like a different world, and the road that they took in making Rayman fall off kinda sucked, and he deserves better than that. Let's talk about Sackboy and Little Big Planet. These games are fun. These games are cute. Really, definitely, it feels like out of all of the recent PlayStation mascots, Sackboy is very utterly and truly what Sony wanted to get out of a mascot. He has crossovers with a bunch of other Sony properties. He wears costumes from a bunch of other different games that happen on those consoles. It's really cool. The games are kid-friendly, which is nice, and the Sackboy himself has a really, I don't want to say iconic, because we really haven't seen other characters like him, and I don't think that we're going to have other characters like him show up in the future. Sackboy is really a unique character, and I really like that a lot. The gigantic zipper on his chest, the really dumb, stupid, big smile with his tongue hanging out all the time. He's really fun. I think in terms of like, does this guy represent PlayStation? I don't know. maybe not a lot, but also not a little either. There's like 4 Little Big Planet games, and they're all really fun. They encourage the couch co-op thing. They encourage family friendliness in their video games. Like, there's hardly any violence in a Little Big Planet game, and that's cool. I think that should be you should acknowledge that. I'm gonna throw Sackboy probably in the B tier. He's really solid. He's kind of like the PIPO monkey in that he's recognizable. He just doesn't have a ton of staying power when compared to other guys, but with like these here, if you were to say top 5 PlayStation mascots go, Sackboy's gonna come up on a lot of people's lists. Okay, let's talk about Metroid. Specifically, let's talk about Samus in Metroid. Metroid Dread was fucking great. Just say that and get that out of the way. I had a lot of fun with Metroid Dread. I've only played a few Metroid games because they're definitely a precursor to the era of, there's a whole genre named after them now, right? So you kind of have to take that into consideration when you talk about how big is this guy's staying power. Silent protagonist, with the exception of like a handful of GameCube games, right? And the suit has gone through a handful of redesigns, but no matter what, if you see this combo of red helmet and torso with a gun arm, you know that's Samus, you know that's Metroid, and then you just think about the legacy that Metroid has come out with. I think that the suit itself is really cool. This kind of brought on that space age. This is like transposed from 80s video games, which were all about like space defense and shooting out aliens and stuff like that. This just transposed onto the console game market, and because of this iconic design, you can kind of infer what the game's going to be about, and that just leaves a lot of doors open in terms of what you're going to put in your game. That being said, the color palette is sweet. I love that. So the old suits used to be orange or like a yellow and the red color, but Dread's suit was a blue and red and white combo, which I think just brought out a lot more of, I want to say, the femininity of the suit, the calmer, less harsh colors, kind of just being like, oh yeah, there's a lady in there. That's really cool. And knowing that the blue kind of inflects on her suit on the inside, which her bodysuit is blue, is really cool. Should we talk about the bodysuit part? Like there's a person underneath this suit, and I don't know if that has to do with like the mascot itself, you know. But Samus is a hard ass. I really appreciate what she did for the video game community and kind of showing people that women can be badass too. Samus is an icon, and purely for that recognizability, this is probably just a really cool, really solid character. Like this is the face of Metroid, which is like the face of Super Nintendo era mascot. Like if you think back to that era between the 5th and 6th generation of consoles, Metroid is usually in the discussion there somewhere, and that's definitely worth recognizing in making this list. All right, next we have Shovel Knight from the acclaimed title Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight's solid, but like he's basically just like every other Knight's character, right? Like he's just a blue suited of armor with freaking massive horns and then a shovel for a weapon. That's cool. That's great, but when compared to some of the others on this list, there's just not a lot about that, save for like the taste and weapon that you use. Like the weapon is the most special thing about your character, which is fine. This isn't a bad design, it's just kind of boring when compared to some of the other stuff on this list. It's like Banjo-Kazooie. The only thing special about Banjo-Kazooie is that the bird lives in the backpack. BLINX is just an anthropomorphic cat with a vacuum and a blue hoodie and goggles. Shovel Knight is just a little blue guy in a blue suit of armor with big horns and a shovel. And like that's it. His game is fun as shit. His game is awesome. His game is fun and intricate and is basically everything you love about a platformer. It's just that like you feel like you need, for as like awesome and as acclaimed as this game is, you feel like the world has to be a little bit bigger, and I wish that there was just more to do in it. It's probably, I don't know why we haven't gotten a Shovel Knight 2 at all, but like this game was great, and if there was a second one in there and they tweaked a couple of things to make like the art a little less simple, he'd probably go on to have as big a legacy as some of these other guys. I'm gonna throw him in the C tier. I feel comfortable putting him in there because he's definitely not as like useless as these guys, but he's definitely not on par with some of these guys up here. Sly Cooper. Sly Cooper is I don't know. The Sly Cooper universe is like a perfect example of personification of a character trait imposed onto an animal that's usually associated with that trait, right? Like raccoons are notably devious creatures. They like sneaking into places, grabbing stuff and making off with it, right? But they're not like crazy greedy creatures. They're just sneaky and one would even say sly animals. Turtles are known for being incredibly slow, but they're also really old, and so humans associate age with wisdom because they've, you know, seen a lot and had a lot of life experiences. So of course the turtle Bentley in the Sly franchise is the super brainiac. Owls are basically known for the same thing, for being watchful creatures, but they're also known for being ruthless and vindictive because they kill without mercy and kill quickly. And so Clockwork is basically like that in this game too, in which he's been watching the Sly family for a long time. So Sly Cooper, the main character of a series of games about stealing stuff from other people who have stolen stuff, being a raccoon character, but also having this stupid smile and really cartoonishly big eyes, really makes for fun character design. So there's some layers here into Sly's design that's really fun. He's also very recognizable. I think this character in particular made a lot of PS2 era kids very happy with his design. He's also one of the only characters in this roster who have been considered for an animated feature film. If you guys remember that trailer from like 2018 where they tried to make them look a lot more like their animal forms and then teased either a TV show or a movie, and then they kind of just dropped all support from it and then nothing was said ever again about it, which is really sad. A lot of the characters on this list don't get to that height, right? A lot of characters on this list don't have that kind of consideration. So Sly is a character, super clean. They don't really change his character image much between his games. Like in this first one here, he has his hat and his backpack is a red backpack on his back. But in the next two games, they're like on his thigh and that's where his equipment comes out of. And then in the most recent game, Themes of Time, it's back to this look where his bag is on his back again. You see this guy, you know who he is, you know that he's a thief, and his cane, that's the thing that's not in his picture, his cane, probably one of the most iconic weapons in video game history. Like his cane being in the shape of a C for the Cooper family is really cool. Sly Cooper's cane is an essential part of his design and basically makes the character. Like that's his weapon, you know what it is. Really cool design, really solid. His franchise was popular enough to be considered for a movie. I'm going to throw him in the B tier just because he's basically on the same level as a combination of like Jack and Ratchet and Donkey Kong, but not quite as iconic in video game history as, say, Mega Man and Crash Bandicoot or Mario. Sonic the motherfucking Hedgehog. A tier. A tier mascot character. I don't think anybody will dispute that. I think maybe a couple people might dispute that and say he should be on the same list as S tier Mario. I think that's a mistake because Sonic is everywhere. Social media, video games, movies. This guy, the blue blur, you put his face, his head on any object, most people are going to know what you're talking about. The only difference between like Sonic and Mario is that Mario has stayed consistent in character design and quality and also the products that he's from, compared to Sonic, who has had extremely high highs. Everybody has seen either a TV show or a movie, a cartoon that has had Sonic in it, or played a video game. However, whereas like Mario will have basically like an A tier Super Mario 3 game every generation with maybe like a dud spin-off in between, Sonic the Hedgehog specifically has whole eras, like whole decades of video games that are just terrible. Like the first 3 Sonic games were awesome. It's what got everybody to like Sonic the Hedgehog. He had a pretty decent time going from speed running across the screen, basic platforming, and then in the jump to 3D, and the 3D level design, the platforming part was always really fun for Sonic design. But then you talk about games after Sonic Adventure 2, games like Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic 06, the storybook Sonic games. There's like a flat period there that went on for like 10 years where just subpar Sonic games came out. And so these two have a pretty decent track record. I would say all of these guys have a really good track record, but just like Crash has this weird time frame in the late 2000s where his games weren't hitting quite good. He had more spin-offs than main titles. Sonic also has that gap in his history. So despite having successful movies, cartoon ventures, and then various forms of his own across his pop culture, I don't think he's quite on the same tier as Mario, who has been consistently great everywhere. This one's probably going to bug a lot of people, and I'm okay with that, and I am willing to talk about it in the comments and in future videos and stuff. I'm gonna put Spyro in the B tier with Sly and Sackboy and Samus and the rest of them. And the reason I'm not putting him on the same tier as Crash Bandicoot, despite these two being intertwined, is that I think Spyro is kind of like Sonic in that, compared to other people in this list and the ones in the top tiers up in here, Spyro has kind of had an up and down roller coaster that has spiraled downwards more than it has gone back up. Crash has had pretty consistent quality in his video games, save for like 2 or 3, basically between Twinsanity and the Insane Trilogy. But Spyro has like totally separate fandoms within its own fandom. Like there's the platforming trilogy in the very beginning, the first 3 games, that kind of set a standard for what a Spyro game is supposed to look like. And then for like 3 games in a row after that, Spyro kind of started going down a path that I don't think a lot of people envisioned for the Dragon. He went from being just a regular collection platforming game to like an action adventure combo game. It's something that was very, very out of left field for a lot of players, including myself. Now that is to say, I don't think those games are bad, I just tend to not group them together with the rest of the other Spyro games. And then after the Legend of Spyro trilogy, they had a totally separate thing where they pulled a Rayman and introduced a new campaign where the characters that were introduced into the Skylanders franchise were more popular than the Spyro character that started it, so they booted him from his own franchise and just called it Skylanders, and then Spyro sat on the back burner until the Reignited trilogy came out. And that kind of sucks. That sucks a lot. Spyro deserves more than this. And I know that like there's a huge movement now in the Reignited community, and there's a lot of internet traction for Spyro, and I love it. I want more Spyro stuff. I want more Spyro games. But it's because of those reasons that I'm hesitant to put it immediately on the A tier, because he just has less of a track record than the rest of these guys here. Spyro's design all by himself is awesome. He's immediately iconic. There's no other purple dragon character in all of platforming games. Like Spyro, aside from all of these ones, he's like the only dragon character. He's the only one. You can immediately pick him out of a lineup if you were forced to with the rest of this list. So like there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 orange mascots on this list, and if you put them all side by side and we're like, hey, tell us who's who, that might be a little difficult for the less initiated in the platforming games market. But Spyro is awesome and iconic, and a lot of video gamers everywhere know who he is. So while he's not quite on the list of the same as the A tier here, he definitely does not deserve to be less than B. Alright, now we're gonna go to Meat Boy, and Meat Boy has a history that I'm not entirely familiar with. I've only ever played Super Meat Boy, but when I went to go and just refresh my memory on some of these guys, and I went to his wiki, apparently there's like 8 or 9 Meat Boy games that go back farther than Super Meat Boy. Like that's the launch that everybody knows. That's the game that they made the documentary about, right? Like Super Meat Boy is iconic, and it's smart, and it's effective game design. As a character, he is easy to draw, which means he is easily plastered on fucking everything. thing. So Meat Boy has a really cool design, and also the fact that when he just runs around, he's just splashing blood on everything. And the reason that, the canonical reason why he dies so quickly is because he's just a walking flesh lump. So he has no skin and no muscle to protect him. This is really funny. It's really cute and it's really smart. But that also means he's just a little gross. Which isn't bad. It's not bad that he's a little gross. But when did the last Super Meat Boy came out? I think it came out in like 2018 or 2019. And he doesn't reach the popularity that a lot of these other characters do. Like, yeah, he has a handful of games, and he got a documentary made about him, but it was more about like the process it took to make this game and get it published, which I think is the important part of that conversation here. I'm gonna throw Meat Boy in the C tier. I think sticking him next to the likes of Banjo is high C, but like sticking him next to BLINX and RAYMAN and Shovel Knight, that just feels right. He's definitely not up here with these guys, and he's certainly not down here with these guys. Okay, do any of you guys remember this motherfucker? How many of you guys recognize TAC? Because I forget for a long time that TAC exists until I start looking back at retro PS2 era platforms and like video game action titles. This guy is from a game called TAC and the Power of Juju, and was a massive hit with especially young audiences when the PS2 era started. TAC is very simple. He's a play on the like tribal woodsman kind of archetype of a character. He's got the purple face paint over his eyes or whatever, and then he's got like a man bun with stuff hanging out of his head, and his weapon was a staff that had like a mystic orb on it, and he would walk around using magic or juju in order to accomplish his puzzling tasks. Now, the reason that TAC is super popular is because he hit it off with like a really young demographic, and he was so popular among that demographic that after his first 2 games came out, Nickelodeon actually picked up the licensing rights to make an animated CG show based on his world. So like they introduced new characters, they gave side characters way more personality and like stories and everything, and then they just made a TV show out of it. And I think eventually the TV show was just more popular than the games, because the TV show, I think, like loosely adapted the first game and had characters from it, but just never touched on the game lore after that. It's a really interesting time in video game culture, and I'm really interested to see how many people will be talking about this game. That being said, this character is ugly as fuck. Like, take everything that you like about Rayman and his cartoonish features and the things that you see on him, and then just try to make it realistic. And he's just ugly. There's something about TAC that really pushes me off, and I don't like it. So because of that, I'm going to stick TAC in the D tier and just kind of try to forget that he exists. But I want to know how many of you guys actually played TAC or watched TAC in the Power of Juju on Nickelodeon, and whether or not you would actually put this higher. As much shit as I talk about TAC, I didn't play any of those games. I was not interested, but maybe if I don't know, I might go back and play these games now for the channel just to say I did, you know. If this is accurate, let me know. If it's not, let's talk about it, and maybe I'll change that opinion in the future. And finally, here we go. We're gonna talk about the last little do-ripper on this list, and that's Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. Ty is a personal favorite mascot in this household where I live. His games are some of my younger brother's favorites, and him and I have a lot of memories of just sitting on the same couch as I watched him play these games to death as kids. It's very simplistic game mechanics, and it's also just full of personality. I'm pretty sure this game just rips on a bunch of Australian stereotypes. Like, all of the accents are either they're two of the polar opposites, right? They're either the heaviest, most authentic outback redneck accents you've ever heard, or they are the most stereotypical fake accents that you have ever heard. But Ty's design in of itself basically harkens back to a lot of what worked with other mascots of this era. He has 2 defining traits, well, 3 basically. He's got his red necktie, he's got the red shorts with the yellow suns on it, but then his character's weapons are boomerangs, and those boomerangs can can change shape, they can change attribute, they can basically turn into a bunch of really cool weapons that have elemental aspects or have additional mechanic functionality attached to them. And that's what made this character really fun. So it's an Australian stereotype where he's just full of tood and he's an animal that's extinct over there. And he has a weapon that not a lot of other mascot characters used, which is a boomerang. So he's very unique in more than one aspect, and I think that's awesome. Ty has also withstood the test of time miraculously somehow. So he had his 3 games on the PS2, and then he had a handful of spin-off games. I think there were a couple on the Game Boy, but basically after those games came out in the mid-2000s, there was nothing Ty related for years. And then I think in the PS4 era, people started drumming up talk online about where Ty games went. Because the games sold really well. Like, the games sold enough to maintain a franchise. Chrome Studios just kind of dropped off the map. And then all of a sudden, the resurgence in the PS4 era was just kind of like, hey guys, you remember Ty? Well, we're still making the games, and we're gonna port them to PC and HD consoles. And now, so I think it's actually possible to play Ty, at least on the PS4 and PC, at 60 frames per second now, which is phenomenal. I own the PC port of Ty, and I have the first 2 Ty games on the PS2. So these games are fun. This character is really cool. Hearing him talk always makes me smile, and I get the hankering to go watch Bluey after I play these games for a little bit. I'm gonna put him in the C tier. I think that's appropriate. I think that there aren't enough games to kind of put him on the same tier as some of these guys up here, especially big hitters like Ape Escape, Donkey Kong, Kirby, and Ratchet and Clank, but he's also not as forgettable as characters like TACK and Gex and BUBSY. He's like right comfortably in here with characters that have decent games, and he has their nice little niche fan bases, but he could be something more if they allowed him to be. Yeah, I think that about does it for Ty. I wish Ty had more games. Alright everybody, take it in. This is the tier list I have for platforming video game mascots. Take it all in. I think the only one true answer, which like everybody will see coming, is that Mario deserves to be on the S tier. Mario definitely deserves to be up where he is, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And then there isn't really like a big failure on this list. Like this is just like the popular ones that I could come up with. I'm sure that there are a lot of characters and games that deserve to be in this F tier, which only had like 1 game and then the rest sucked, but I couldn't come up with one. If I were forced to choose, I think it would probably either be BUBSY or KNACK, just because BUBSY is so forgettable and everybody started to hate KNACK after the second game came out. But I don't think that they deserve that. I think their design in KNACK's design and BUBSY's early games are what saved those franchises. Otherwise, yeah, I would agree with you. If I were to be wishy-washy with any of these, I think probably Ratchet deserves the A, just because of how many games there are. He has a movie. There's just not enough love for Ratchet in today's modern gaming scape. But that about does it for me, everybody. I think I've satisfied my quota of ranking on tier lists for a little bit. Let me know what you thought about my thoughts in the comments down below, and if you liked or disliked any of my rankings, tell me why. Let's have a conversation about some video games in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, if you liked what you saw, give me a big ol' thumbs up, and consider hitting the subscribe button for more of these tier lists in the future. I'm gonna get out of here, folks. Have a wonderful night. Don't forget to stay awesome and be kind and rewind. Excelsior.